I have had enough experiences to tell me they're going to be a bad client. Like, you can hear that and say, that's going to be a bad client.
Yep.
And so I can either say, I really need that $2,500 a month, or I can say, no, sir. It's negative energy that it's going to bring to my organization, and I will protect my house.
This isn't going to be a standard introduction, because this one is, when I say from the heart, you and I spoke briefly at Inbound, but let me tell you, the impact that your book has had on our organization has been phenomenal. Just from motivating the staff to keeping the morale high in the office, but the biggest one is the actual business that we're getting out of it. So as a testimonial to you and your business and your the way you think and operate your business, it's changed the way we operate ours. And I want to thank you for that. And that's the best introduction you can get, Marcus.
I appreciate that.
It really affected us in a positive way. So thank you so much. But you're the man when it comes to marketing. So that's why I want to have you in there. But what I got into earlier, Marcus, was my personal mentor that I had, a guy named Dave Lawrence. And Dave Lawrence was a former publisher of the Miami Herald, the Detroit Free Press, and super successful guy. But I've learned a lot from Dave, and every month I go out to dinner with him and his wife and my wife, and we just, I learned so much. So mentors are critical to any business owner. And I'd like to hear who your mentor was or still is.
Well, I think so this is not your typical mentor answer, but I think there's a couple there. Foremost, I always say that in terms of business and the way that I think today and the way that I communicate, Jim Rohn, even though I didn't ever meet him, Jim Rohn, for those that have ever listened to him before, last name is Rohn. He, to me, was the greatest personal development / business mind of the 20th century. And I have listened to his videos and his, at the time, tapes back in the day, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours worth of his content. It's resonated with me. Also have an uncle that was a really successful lawyer, and my Uncle Ralph, and he taught me a lot. Specifically, he taught me about presence, about how to walk into a room and bring energy with you every single time. He just had that gravitas, right? That was so beautiful. And he also, he was wealthy. And when I was in college, I was actually married really young. I was married while I was in college. And I was broke, like every young married couple should be, which is a good thing. And he, instead of helping us financially, because we were right there, he was right there at the university, he would find ways for me to work for him, and he would pay me to do that. And so, in other words, he never would just give me the money, because he realized that that's contrary to the way that it's supposed to work, right? And so he would come up with creative ways to help us out a lot. So we had to clean his entire condominium, right? Paid us a lot of money, but we had to clean, my wife and I spent hours and hours doing that. That was a beautiful thing because we got to work together, but that, I think, was like $500. That $500 that was a couple weeks worth of expenses. You know what I'm saying? That was a huge deal for a young couple in college. So he'd be my second mentor, probably.
That's great. And speaking of that, going back, and I'm going to take you back way back when you were a kid. By the way, you went to West Virginia, right?
Yeah, to college. Yeah.
College at West Virginia University. So before that, though, when you were younger, and when I did some research on you and kind of looked at how you were as a young child and kind of what motivated you to become a businessman, one of the stories that really resonated with me was, and I'm going to just tell you out the shampoo story. So can you tell our audience about how just a shampoo bottle really impacted you? And if you think about that now, what that meant to you?
Yeah, I don't even remember when I told that story, but I grew up definitely lower middle class, and Some people would call it poor, but I know what poor looks like because I've been outside the United States. So I call it lower middle class. We, my parents were divorced, I guess, I don't know, around 11, 12 years old, like many kids these days. And my mom was always struggling financially, always struggling. She was working as hard as she could and trying to balance it all, not getting enough sleep. And we didn't always have enough money. And I specifically remember one winter where we couldn't pay to heat the house, right? And so that was when I remember walking into the shower one morning, and the shampoo was frozen, and it really stuck with me, like the image of it being frozen, because I'm like, I didn't know shampoo did that, right?
Right.
And the other part was to that is so much of my childhood, I remember that I was the one that had to answer the phone. And the reason for that was because the creditors were calling. And this is back in the day when you didn't have caller ID, and you had that single landline. We had cell phones. And so my parents would have me pick up the phone to vet who it was. And you hear, if it's a creditor, let it, say I'm not home. So I just got used to that as a kid, and I developed a relationship with debt. A relationship that was, you know what, if there's any way that I can prevent that from happening in my life when I get older, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And I look at those days with gratitude, you know what I'm saying? Because what better teacher than experience? And it helps you to appreciate what you have, right? And I don't look back and say, man, I had a terrible childhood. I'm thinking to myself, wow, I'm just grateful that I experienced what I did so as to help me develop what is a really healthy relationship with debt and with money. And it's continued with me to this day.
That's awesome, man. That's phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that. The, from a business side, as a business owner, as a small business owner, so many of us go through those kind of shampoo stories, struggling and not really and it's a real life struggle, building a business and understanding that. One of the things I love about your model and in the book, They Ask, You Answer, is, a lot of the stuff that you're doing here doesn't cost a lot of money. Creating content doesn't have to, like what we're doing right now, we're educating our audience, but you know what? We're creating content too. And we're bringing value back to the audience. And that's what I loved about reading that book. And that was my biggest takeaway, is that, unlike your traditional salesperson where you're out there selling and, we all have a visual of what a salesperson looks like, with the grease back hair and the cigar in the mouth and and this model of content marketing is something that doesn't have to cost a lot of money for a small business owner. So I guess my question to you, Marcus, on that is, I'm a small business. I'm listening to this podcast. I'm a small business owner. I'm just getting started out. And let's say I'm doing $1 million a year in revenue. Well, I wouldn't just get started out. Let's say I'm getting, and I have a staff and I want to scale to 10 million a year. What are some takeaways that we can do as an organization that typically is not doing, this company I'm giving you as an example, doesn't do content marketing, but what can you give them as a takeaway of some action items to say, all right, if you do this, it'll kind of move the needle?
Yeah. So there's a lot to this question here, and I just want to make sure the audience understands what They Ask, You Answer even is, for those that haven't necessarily, they're not familiar with it. But, the quick story is I started a swimming pool company in 2001 with a couple business partners. I was right out of college. Things were going okay for us up until 2008 when the economy dropped out, and pool companies all over the globe went out of business, especially in the United States. It was really, really bad. And we were very, very close to going out of business and filing bankruptcy. And it was during that time that I really started to research the internet and read about inbound and content marketing and social and blogging. And, what I heard in my simple pool guy mind was, Marcus, if you really just obsess over your customers' questions, whether they sound good, bad, or ugly, but if you're willing to listen to them obsessively and address them on your website through text and video, you might save your company. You might save your business. So I said, well, I can certainly do that. That doesn't cost a lot. And so one thing that I did Todd, is that I remember distinctively going to my wife and I said, she knew we were getting ready to lose company. And, it was like a weight that we were carrying around. And I said, I need to produce this content. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to work late into the night. And we just don't have a choice. She totally understood. And so I produced almost a piece of content a day for the first year. And
was that mostly written?
It was all written. It was all written at first.
Okay.
Probably. And then by the next year we got into YouTube as well. But and I was not I was not technologically gifted whatsoever. It was always very difficult for me. I'm not just one of those people that gets it, and I'm just outside. I'm outside of what it is to be a millennial. I'm 41 right now. So, it's one of those things where I it wasn't natural, but was natural, was listening well and being able to talk about it. I wasn't even a very good writer at first. I was always a good communicator, but not a great writer at first. But I just started and I published the first one. And then I started to notice patterns, right? And there was distinctive patterns as to what resonated, what was getting traction and what was not. Now, because the philosophy was they ask you answer, I didn't really consider what was the norm for marketing at that time. So in other words, an example is I wrote about how much does a fiberglass pool cost on our website. Well, it turns out that no swimming pool company in the world had addressed how much an in-ground swimming pool costs on their website up to that point. Now, of course, the reason why none had done it is the same reason why almost all companies don't do it, is they're afraid of certain things. Fear. Afraid of the competition, which is really silly. Afraid that, every job is different and it's customized, which is silly because if you don't explain why it's customized, well, then you drive ignorance in the marketplace. And ignorance is what drives commoditization, and that's what pushes prices down, right? And sometimes people say, well, I can't talk about prices because it costs too much. Our stuff is more expensive. And what actually scares us away in the buying process is not when somebody talks and explains pricing, but it's when they don't explain it. And when they allow, again, ignorance to exist. That's what turns us off. That's what turns us away. And so we did this. And I quickly learned, like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to get a ton of traffic on the website. Again, I talked about things nobody was talking about. I talked about what was the difference between concrete and fiberglass pools. Nobody was talking about that. I talked about the problems with fiberglass pools. I talked about, are fiberglass pools ugly? Are fiberglass pools cheap? Do fiberglass pools pop out of the ground? All the negative stuff, I was just going to talk about it. Well, it turns out that nobody was doing that.
Right.
And, to make a long story short, it became the most trafficked swimming pool website in the world within a couple of years, and the business exploded. And then I started a manufacturing company because of all the leads we were getting, and now I have dealers all over the country. And it's an unbelievable business. And my two business partners run it, and it's really a really wonderful business. But the thing about it is, we started off, we were flat broke, and I have business owners and I have people come to me all the time. They say, Marcus, I read your book, They Ask You Answer. I'd like to do this. But there's always a but. And I just got to focus on these buts for a second, Todd, because it's relevant to your question. The worst but that we make is, but my business or my situation is different. That is the biggest load of BS that any business owner could ever tell themselves. The reason for that is, whether you're B2B, B2C, B2G, big, small, local, national, mom, pop, product, service, it just doesn't really matter. Your business is based on one fundamental emotion. So is mine as a pool guy. So is yours, Todd. So is with my agency. It's all the same business. The singular emotion that ties us all together as businesses is the emotion that allows a buyer, a prospect, a customer to give you their money. And of course, that's called trust. And if I went to anybody and I said, is trust going to be fundamental to your business in 20 years? You'd say yes. If I said, is Facebook or LinkedIn going to be fundamental to your business in 20 years? You'd say, I probably not. And you're probably right. It's probably not going to be, but trust will never go away. It's a principle. It's eternal. It wasn't born. It was just there and it'll always live, right? So this is the beauty behind trust. And if somebody accepts that reality, they don't sit there and say, I'm different. They say, okay, just like you, I'm in a battle for trust. So the question is, what generates the most trust in the marketplace? Well, one thing that easily generates it is the fact that nobody else is willing to talk about the things that you're willing to talk about if you solely base what you're discussing on what buyers want to know, how they want to buy, how they want to learn. It's a beautiful compass, the buyer. Like, they will show you the direction of your business if you really just pay attention to it. It's not rocket science whatsoever. That's a wonderful thing about They Ask You Answer. It is for, it was designed by a pool guy for businesses all over the world. Right? You do not have to be incredibly intelligent. You just have to be obsessive about other people and the way that they think. That's pretty simple if you just have eyes and ears, right? I mean, that's how it works. The other thing that I see people say is, I just don't think we have the time. Okay? I don't think we have the time to produce the content. So let's really be honest about that, right, Todd? Because in life, I've realized that we say we don't have the time when we don't value that thing. That's the choice that we make. If I, people think I'm really busy. I am, but I still spend about 220 hours a year on the water fishing with my son. I know that because the motor tracks how many hours it's actually going. So I know it's about 220 hours a year. That's quite a few days on the water a year. It's valuable to us. That's the thing that he and I do together. So I didn't have the time, and so I went from 8 to 6 hours of sleep a night for 2 straight years and typed away at the kitchen table while my wife was in bed. I didn't feel sorry for myself. And that's another thing. I got to say this, dude. I see a lot of businesses feeling sorry for themselves because they're overwhelmed. Well, that's the choice we made. We're control freaks, you and I.
Yeah.
We started a business because we wanted to control our destiny. And daggone it, it just doesn't do us any good to say, well, I don't like what comes with this package. Well, if you don't like it, it's okay. It's not for everybody. But daggone, if you want to do something that just pulls you out of bed each day, right, and drives you, you don't know it's Saturday, right? You just know. That to me is a beautiful thing. And so that's why, when I look at They Ask You Answer, if somebody is willing to get past the excuses, if you just listen, if you just address the questions, well, then you're going to probably be more successful than your counterparts. There's a lot more to it. Obviously, it's in the book, but that's the foundation.
That's great. And, the big takeaway I got just from what you said there is prioritizing your time, because you mentioned going out in the boat with your son, and obviously that's memories that are going to last forever for both you and your son. But how, and to your point of what you just said about small businesses and doing the blame game and stuff like that, but they need to prioritize. And that's the biggest thing I think that we can all teach them, is that, hey, prioritize what's important to you and go all in on that. Family should be number one. Yeah. And then if maybe you can't watch Sports Center from 10 to 11 and then play Xbox from 12 to, you got to prioritize that. And I think that's so important. And grind, in the beginning, especially when you're just starting a business, it's a big grind. And the problem I think I see a lot of, Marcus, is it's a marathon business. It's not a sprint. And everybody's thinking that, hey, if I create this piece of content and I put it up there, I'm going to become a Marcus Sheridan, or I'm going to be, or it doesn't work like that. That. So talk about how to kind of set your mind as a business owner to prepare for a marathon versus this as a sprint.
So if you're going to produce content, especially if you're going to embrace They Ask You Answer, there's a couple things. Things you need to realize. Number one, most companies don't succeed with content because they do not focus on what buyers really care about. In the book, we call those the big 5, but there's 5 subjects that move the needle. And essentially how it works is, if you look at the traditional buyer's funnel, where you need to start is at the bottom of the funnel, the people that are actually looking for that product or that service, and the questions that they have. Right? So, it would have been dumb of me if I had written an article about 5 fun games to play in your swimming pool. That is not something that a salesperson is ever asked. I was never asked that question. It also denotes they might already own a pool, or maybe they're looking to have a pool at the local a party at the local YMCA pool this Saturday. That's not a smart article to write. Yet I see pool companies produce stupid stuff like that. That's not the goal. The goal is, okay, what is somebody that's actually looking for this thing going to say? Who are the best pool builders in Richmond, Virginia? Yeah, that's a question that they're going to ask in my area. What's the difference between concrete and fiberglass pools? That's a question. What are the problems with fiberglass pools? That means they're looking at fiberglass pools. They've heard negative things about fiberglass pools. They kind of want a fiberglass pool, otherwise they wouldn't ask. That's a very bottom of the funnel based question. Right?
Uncomfortable questions you're talking about.
Uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
Stuff, once again, it's the stuff that nobody addresses. So you have to start with that mindset. Now, once you do that, you got to understand that quality and quantity make a difference. See, I have so many, because the book's done so well, I've had so many people email me and say, when they ask you answer, I don't seem to be getting the results that I hope to get. I said, okay, well, send me your URL. Let me look at it. And it's like the obvious stuff every single time, Todd. So there's a quality and quantity component to this. It's not an either or, it's a both. People say to me, how do I become world class? Here, I'll give you the simple formula. You got to, once you focus on bottom of the funnel, you've got to do that, and you've got to produce 3 pieces of textual content a week, every week for the first year. You can't blink. It's 150 pieces your first year. They've got to be good, they've got to be unbiased, and they should be at a minimum 750 words each, preferably 1,000 or more. You say, why 1,000 or more? Because the average number 1 ranked page in Google search results is 1,000 words. Okay. So this is not this is just historical data that I have. And it's all the companies I have personally reviewed, like my company has reviewed over 50,000 blog articles. Okay. We've reviewed probably about 1,000 client videos. And I can tell you, I know what the numbers are in terms of where you see hockey stick growth. That's just where it is. And so if somebody's not doing those numbers, they're not going to hit it. They're just not going to hit it. And so you got to say, okay, focus on the right content. It's got to be the right quality. It's got to be the right quantity. Now, even still, though, it's probably not going to start working for a period of time. What period of time? I don't know. What is the average? 6 to 12 months, you start to see really, really significant results. But I can tell you this, it can work for you tomorrow if you do the other part that most people forget, which is you got to integrate it into the sales process. And so most salespeople, most business development folks don't understand, and you think it would be natural, but it's not, how to integrate content into the sales process. And so the book talks a lot about that with the assignment selling section, but the fact of the matter is, unless you teach your sales team how to intelligently and strategically integrate that content, be it text or video, into the sales process, they're probably not going to do it nearly as well as they could. But if you do, it's going to shorten the sales cycle. It's going to increase the closing rates all day long. And it's going to really move them through the funnel much, much faster. It's an absolute no-brainer. And that can work for you tomorrow. You produce a cost article today that you integrate into your sales process tomorrow can help you close a deal next week.
It'll speed up the process too of
100%.
selling. Yep. And
That's
one of the things
100%.
you mentioned the quality of content. Let's talk about that a little bit because, and I'm going to tell you, I was a victim of this. I did this myself, and it was a problem that I had because as a salesperson, I'm trying to create content. Before I read your book, my content was based sales content. In other words, I had a mission which was, how do I get that sale? How do I sell that person? And you could tell if I gave you what I wrote before, you look at it and it looked like a salesperson wrote it because I'm trying to, of course, get a sale. So I love how when you mentioned just now quality, the quality of the content, you don't try to sell anything. Actually, it's the opposite. And look at what you're doing. You've done with this podcast. You're not selling anything. It's, hey, let me give value. Let me. How do I help? How do I give value? So can you talk about
So I've got a general philosophy, and that is this: people aren't dumb, right? So they can figure out on their own whether or not something is a good fit. So it's not my job to force feed anything. So we're going to present the facts, and then you can make a decision. And I'll trust you and your intelligence to figure it out, right? I'm not going to do it in some snarky way. I'm not going to do it in a manipulative way. I'm just going to tell you the facts. So for example, somebody's listening to this right now. You're like, well, what does that sound like? Or what does that look like? So let me give you a really simple one. Let's say that you're going to produce an article or a video on concrete versus fiberglass pools. Okay. And let's say you're a fiberglass pool builder, which is what I was and am. And so it might sound something like this. Now, as I say this, if you're listening to this right now, a podcast, just ask yourself, do I communicate my organization? Do we communicate that way to the marketplace? Right? That's what I want you to think. So it might sound like this. One of the questions that we get all the time from shoppers is, okay, Marcus, be honest. Tell me the difference between concrete and fiberglass pools. And why should I choose fiberglass anyway? Well, the truth is, you shouldn't always choose fiberglass. In fact, there are times when concrete is the better option. So what this article or what this video is going to do, it's going to explain to you honestly and transparently the pros and the cons of both types of swimming pools. And then by the end, hopefully, you'll have a great sense as to which is the best choice for you. Now, what's funny is when I'm with audiences, Todd, and I say, what percentage of businesses talk to you like that? They say, almost none. Almost none. There's an inherent bias that comes across with almost all the content online. And so our BS meters go off. We sense it as consumers, and we don't lean in and say, I trust you. But if you talk like that, the person will drop their guard and they'll say, my goodness, this person thinks just like me. They're in this for me. And that's where the trust comes from.
And the clients and the prospects, I should say, not clients, that aren't a good fit for your company, you don't want to work with them anyway. So you're basically, you're identifying.
Saved everybody time.
Exactly. And we just did that actually. I wrote an article on the 3 marketing tactics small businesses should not invest in. And you know what one of them, number 1 was? A service that's 80% of my revenue. It's SEO. And I go on to explain, if you're a small business, and I explain why, I don't think you should do it, because we've dealt with, and believe me, in the beginning, Marcus, I took on every client, as long as they had a pulse and they wanted it. And it was a mistake I made as a business owner, because if you have a company who's a small business who needs, they're struggling and it's hard to make payroll and let's do this. And SEO is a long-term play. And I tell them, don't do it. Join a networking group, in this case, create content, because that's going to be something that,
or maybe do pay-per-click, because at least that way you're assured
instant
on the spend, you're going to get some, hopefully, if you're doing it right, some qualified traffic. Well, that's a really good point. And the fact is, most businesses aren't willing to talk like that. And to that point, Todd, I try to help companies all the time understand this very important principle. And that is, it's dramatically important that you tell prospect what you are not than what you are. Because the moment you're willing to say what you're not is the moment you become dramatically more attractive to those who you are a good fit for. So in other words, I will tell somebody, like as an owner of an agency. Let's use a B2B example here. So as an owner of an agency, I will tell people, now listen, if you just want an agency to produce your content for you, you just want to write a check and have them produce it for you, you get a set deliverable each month. Well, then we're not the agency for you. But if you're looking for someone that's going to teach you how to literally own your content strategy so that you can crush it in-house, well then, if that sounds appealing to you, we might be a great fit.
That's great. That's
so therein lies the difference, right? Therein lies the difference. And so I tell people, there's nothing wrong with doing it, the way most agencies do it. That's fine. It's just not the way that I'm going to teach you how to do it. And so we either align with philosophy or we don't. It's no big loss to me. It's no big deal. I think, and when you talk like that to your prospects too, there's something very appealing. I have to teach this to my team a lot. They struggle with this, especially because we do so much consulting as a company. And this is a hard, and I'm actually been thinking about this a lot, Todd, because I need to come up with a system so as to teach this to people better. But there is power in the willingness to respectfully walk away. And when someone knows that you're willing to respectfully, in the right context, walk away, you have so much more authority with that individual. But if you're not willing to walk away, if you are going to just hold on no matter what, got to figure out a way to make it work, got to run this lead through, got to make me a sale, you have no power. You have no leverage.
That's right. And I was actually guilty of what you're talking about right now, literally an hour ago. And I'm going to tell you a real life example that just happened. So we have a video team, right? And Tyrone, who oversees the video team, came up to me and said, "Hey, Todd, we have a IT company who refers us some business, and they need a video done and it's got to be done on Saturday." And I said, and it was a mistake, especially hearing you say this now, but I said, "Let's see if we can do this." The answer should have been, "No, we can't do that," because obviously the time frame is, and it's okay to say no. So that's
and I'm assuming too, you've said yes to that before and it blew up in your face.
exactly.
And so experience has told you that that never works out.
That's right. And
Right.
by the way, right now, as I'm talking, Tyrone's doing backflips. He's so excited that he gets to say no.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of ways that this works out. I mean, so I'll give you, speaking of real-time examples, I had a company in Europe contact me about consulting. And we have a really, really simple content consulting package that we do. It's our most simple package with companies. It's a guidance package, and they meet with one of our content coaches a few times a month. It's $2,500 a month. And this is a company that, says, "I want to go all in on the Ask You Answer." I give them the price, $2,500 a month for what they needed. It's basic. I know they have it. And they say, "We really want you to give us a 10% discount." And I said, you really are going to allow $250 to stand between you doing this okay and doing it at a world-class level? Is really that what you're saying? And they said, "Well, we really feel like you should give us $250 off." And I said, "Based on this conversation, I can tell we're not a good fit. And that's okay." And I always say that. We're not a good fit, and that's okay. And I walked away. And I remember my salesperson, because this was actually done by email, because they sent us, they had us write up an SOW, simple. They knew how much it was, and they tried to get that final 10%. That I have had enough experiences to tell me they're going to be a bad client. You know too, don't you, Todd? Like, you can hear that and say, "That's going to be a bad client."
Yeah.
And so I can either say, "I really need that $2,500 a month," or I can say, "No, sir. No, sir. It's negative energy that it's going to bring to my organization, and I will protect my house," right? And that's so much of what we do. But it goes back to knowing what you're not, right? And that's not who we are. And so I'm happily, I move on. I don't blink.
That's awesome. Do you put that on, or do you recommend, maybe not your companies personally, but do you recommend a company even putting something like that on
100%.
their website?
You should have a section on your website that says who we're not a good fit for.
That's awesome.
100%. You should have a video on your site that says, now, and we've coached a lot of companies on how to do this. Don't do it in a snarky or sarcastic way. So in other words, what you don't want to do is you don't want to say something like, "Well, if you don't understand the value of $1, well, then we're not a good fit for you." That's stupid, right? You don't want to do that. So in my case, I could say something, as much as, if you are looking for an agency to do all your social media for you, and you don't want to have any involvement in that yourself, you don't want to own it yourself, well, then we're not going to be a good fit for you. So that's an example of that. It's just very frank and honest.
Transparency.
It's like, I'm not gonna do your tweets. I'm going to set up a strategy for you and teach you how to do it and let you do it so you become great at it, or I'm not going to be your guy.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you want to hire an agency that will do that for you. There's a million of them, just not me.
Got it. That's great. So let's use a real life example now. I buy in, I read the book, They Ask You Answer. My company buys into it. We're now all creating content. So we have all this content being created. We got video, we got audio, we got images. We even have an audio podcast that we're doing. So now we have all this content, and it's obviously sitting, the home is our website, but let's talk a little bit about distribution and some strategies you have around taking that content and distributing it. You mentioned 1,000-word minimum on the blogs and that. So where do we pay?
So first off, I would suggest that the where on the site that you consider this is that every site, I believe, should have some type of learning or knowledge center. And underneath that learning or knowledge center, you'd have a series of educational articles, potentially educational podcasts or educational webinars, educational videos, your case studies. But they should live separately underneath that umbrella that is the Learning Center, right? Because the idea is the person wants to communicate or to learn in their preferred style. Like, okay, you're a visual learner, go to the video library. You're a textual learner, you want meat and potatoes, go to the article library. So that's where you want to start with it. Second thing that you want to do, and again, this is the part that everybody skips, you want to teach your sales team how to integrate in the sales process. Very, very critical, very critical. And I'm amazed that nobody does this. It's marketers. I got to share a crazy stat with you that just makes you smack your forehead. So because there's so much silos that exist between sales and marketing, they're treated differently. And I have the luxury of speaking to both so much. I strategize like a marketer. I talk like a salesperson. I think like a business owner. And so I think I lost my place. You're going to need to edit this. I was talking about something I just totally blanked on.
That's all right. Yeah, we're going to edit it all out. But you were talking about the sales and marketing and how they kind of butt.
Okay, so second place. Okay, I'm just going to start a second thing.
Yeah.
Right. So you got to teach the sales team how to integrate it into their content. So the stat that I want to tell you about is, and this is where the silos come from, is that 18% of sales emails, not marketing emails, but sales emails, these are one-to-one emails from you to the prospect, 18% are opened on average. Now, what is the number one thing that causes somebody to open or not open an email?
I would think your subject line.
You're correct, your subject line. So here's what's crazy, Todd, and I've polled thousands of salespeople on this in audiences. I have never had a sales team tell me they were trained on how to write subject lines, ever. I've never had a single one say, yeah, we were trained. Can you believe that? Many of them send 100 emails a week or more, and they've never been trained. Think about that.
And they're so used to putting follow up as the subject line.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, which is the death of all open rates, right? So this is the thing that we see. This is the thing that we see. And so you got to teach the sales team how to use it, how to integrate in the sales process. Obviously, this is going to be the fodder for your social media. Companies all the time say, yeah, we need a social media plan. I'm like, no, you need a content plan that happens to benefit your social media. Because if you got nothing to bring to the party, you're not going to be invited back. Right? And so that's I do well on LinkedIn. Why do I do well on LinkedIn? I post 2 videos a week. That's why. So I wouldn't jack squat on LinkedIn if I didn't post 2 videos a week. I post 2 videos a week on LinkedIn. That's what I do, right? And so that's the mindset that you have. Everything starts with that foundational element of you got to be a teacher, right? And you got to produce the content, and then all the good stuff happens after that.
That's awesome. So you mentioned on that as far as social media, because the article I just told you that we wrote, one was on the 3 things. One of them was social media. A lot of companies are so fast to say, let me hire a social media person to post content for me. And I write in this article, don't waste your money on doing that. To your point of what you just said, focus on the content, creating the content, and being a content machine versus a social media post.
Every company, certainly anyone that's doing a couple million or more, and you might need to do this yourself if you're not big enough yet, but I'd argue with you if you told me you weren't big enough in most cases. If you're serious about content, you should have a content manager / writer. And we hire tons of these, help hire for our clients, because we don't produce people's content, but they're all doing what they ask you answer. They all have their in-house content manager, and generally we go after recent journalist graduates. And the reason for that is a recent journalist graduate, they can write, they can edit, they can interview. Many of them are good with social, many of them are good with video. Most of them can't get a job, right? So you got a high supply with low demand, and it's a perfect opportunity to fill a void in the marketplace, for recent college graduates. And, you can get a content writer for less than half of what you would pay a salesperson. But the returns on your company over the next couple of years is going to be dramatically more, I can tell you that. And so you train that person. See, it's much easier to train a writer to be a great marketer than it is to take a marketer and train them to be a good writer. You can't really do it. That fails. And I have companies all the time say, yeah, I think I've got somebody on staff that could probably do that, content stuff. I'm like, really? So on a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a writer are they? You got to be very, very honest. And they'll say, oh, they're 7 or 8. I'm like, it's got to be a 9 or higher. 9 or higher, because anything less than a 9, they ain't going to do it. And you're not going to get your staff to write content in most cases. But what you can get them to do is sit down and just share their subject matter expertise with that content manager. I mean, heck, everybody knows that at my agency, I'm pretty busy. So once a week, I meet with one of our content writers, and he asks me a series of questions. I talk fast. We blow through it in 20 minutes. And that's going to give them 1,000 words, right? So, and besides, when you're talking, like if you're just giving a video, so it's 100 words a minute. 100 words a minute is what people average, right? And so if I talk for 10 minutes on a subject, and that ain't hard to do, then that's 1,000 words, and I'm out of there. And I don't have to worry about it until next week, but I'm a contributor. And that's the model.
And what about even repurposing? Like our content that we're doing right now is obviously in audio, but hiring a company, I'm sure I don't know the exact price of what it would be, but I don't think it'd be that much money to transcribe this into a written blog.
Rev.com does that. They it's like $1 a minute. It's so friggin' like transcription is the easiest thing in the world to do for nothing. It's the cheapest thing. So to your point, Todd, repurposing content makes a lot of sense. But once again, when you have a content manager, they're doing this stuff for you. And so the model is this. That content manager is doing 3 pieces of content, written content for you a week. They're sharing your stuff on social. They're doing therefore the promotional, and they're doing the repurpose / distribution stuff that you have. And of course, they're managing the schedule with the subject matter experts, sales team, and any other subject matter experts, just to keep the flow coming in. That's what they should do. Is it a full-time job? 100%. There's very few of you that are not. Now, somebody might say, are there any organizations that don't need a content manager? Well, there's some that you might want to shift it, right? So I would say if I was a restaurant, for example, I would have somebody that was primarily focused on video plus social, right? Because that's really what a restaurant needs. Showing the video story of the food and of the experience and all the stuff that comes with it, right? And because it's it's very event-driven restaurants, but most companies are not like that. Most start with textual content. That won't always be the case, but it is still to this day. Not saying that video is not fundamentally important, but just in terms of search, in terms of really driving more traffic, generally we recommend that you start with the textual content. And then usually you'll see a company, they'll start to get the massive return, 6 to 12 months, and they'll bring on a full-time videographer right around that time.
So following your model of what you're talking about, and I'm excited to hear eventually, because I think you're going to come up with a new name for a salesperson. Have you done that yet?
It's funny. A lot of the companies that we work with, they just get rid of sales and marketing. They call it revenue team. And that's, what they're doing is because they're so overlapped. It's almost silly to have this like us, them vibe. It's really stupid, especially if a salesperson's worth their salt. They're saying, I need to be engaged in that vetting process that happens before the handshake. In other words, on the digital side of the sales process. And if a marketing team's worth their salt, they're saying, we've got to be obsessed with sales numbers.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about where people can get educated on this stuff. I know you're obviously an authority as it relates to your book, and you have a workshop. Tell us, a conference. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, my conference is freaking awesome. And that sounds braggadocious, but it's true. So you're allowed to say it if it's true. It's called Digital Sales and Marketing World. Notice it says Digital Sales and Marketing World, because it's the one event that's out there that's created for teams and to eliminate the silos between sales and marketing. You go to these marketing events, marketer gets fired up, goes back to the office, says, let's implement this, and everybody rains on his or her parade. I see it all the time. Number one email I get is frustrated marketers saying, man, I'm just sick of this. I'm ready to leave my company. That's the number one email that I get, if you can believe that, Todd. And so, I said, somehow we've got to stop this. And so we'll have somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people at Hartford, Connecticut, in April 6th and 7th. next year. Amazing speakers, sales and marketing speakers. But it's the business event for teams. So if you have, more than one of you, now there's solopreneurs there too, but you want to align your team, get them on the same page, sales, marketing, leadership, that's the event for you.
That's awesome.
You can also email me directly. I'm Marcus@marcussheridan.com. If anybody has any questions, again, Marcus@marcussheridan.com. I put my email in my book, which was, a lot of people said that was crazy. To me, it's really stinking awesome though, because I find one-to-one email outrageously
undervalued.
It's so real and sincere. There's no ulterior motives to it. It's not about what everybody sees or thinks about it. It's just this one-to-one. That's why I have a very personal newsletter that I do as well, because I just get joy out of the one-to-one. If I send out a personal newsletter to somebody and somebody else responds, that's just between us. They didn't share it. They didn't like it. It was just an interaction. That's as human as it gets online. And that's why I do that.
That's good. Speaking of human on that, and one of the takeaways I got from the workshop, the conference we just had, was chatbots and how powerful, and there was, they must have had 4 or 5 breakout sessions just on chatbots. Yeah. What's your take on that? And are you all in on that? What's your thought?
So when everybody says, how do I feel about XYZ? Go back to the principle, right? So the principle that, of course, I lean on is they ask, you answer. That means obsessing over their questions and giving them the best, most relevant, specific answer as quickly as possible, right? And so therein lies the value of chat, because people are very impatient. Now, despite what the stupid studies say, people's attention spans is not lower. That's actually not true. That means as humans, we're losing intelligence. That's not actually true. We do have less tolerance for that which we don't value, right? And so that's when we don't feel like we're being fed. When we don't feel like we're getting the quick answers, we jump. But if we feel like we're being fed, if we feel like, wow, this company knows exactly what I want, when I want, how I want it, then we're all in. That's why there's certain websites we go back to every single day. It's what we do. We love them so much. You can't tell me it's a attention span problem. All right, it's a loyalty problem because of value, lack of value. So chatbots, when done right, promote significant value because it allows real-time answers. That's the essence of they ask you answer. But you got to do it right. If you're going to do it all clunky, might not want to play yet, right? Or you might just want to experiment a little bit, do 30 minutes a day, feel it out. How are you doing this? Don't just say, we're going to go 24/7 chat. That's a recipe for disaster.
It's a little too early for that now, right? Yeah. That's good stuff, man. You've been phenomenal, opening up with a lot of incredible information and value that anybody who listens to this is going to learn a ton. Is there anything that we missed here that you would say, you know what, Todd, here's one thing that I've talked to a lot of businesses and I see this a lot. What's the one thing that maybe you can give as a thing that we didn't talk about?
Well, I would just say that none of this happens unless you get buy-in. And buy-in is the biggest issue for marketers around the world today. It's the biggest problem with sales and marketing teams, because when there's resistance comes from a lack of communication, a lack of understanding. Lack of understanding comes from a lack of education. And so there's a lot of frustrated marketers that wouldn't be so frustrated if their bosses were the ones at the conference instead of themselves, if their sales manager was at the conference instead of themselves. So everything starts with buy-in. The most important act any marketer can do professionally is get buy-in from their team. Once they do that, everything will start to change. And so I just would remind everybody of that. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote it to help marketers get buy-in with sales and leadership, because again, that is the biggest problem.
And it sounds like that's why you're having that conference too, yes, the digital sales, because that's and I want to tell you a story, Marcus, of my old business that I had was in the mortgage business. And I started that company in 1999. Timing was great. It was before the crash, everything was going up. And in 2002, I found out about a conference in Texas, and it was called. I'm drawing a blank now. We got to edit this now too, because I don't want to draw a blank on this. It was by referral only. That's what it was called. The guy's name was Joe Havish, I think, or Hesh. Anyway, by referral only. The model with by referral only was, how do you build a business around referral-based businesses?
Mm-hmm.
And this is 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
And I literally, to your point, I flew out, and it was a big investment, but I flew out about, I think it was 14 of us in South Florida and Tampa. I had offices in Tampa and South Florida, and we all went out to Texas and sat in at this by referral only. And one of the takeaways that we got from this was, when somebody comes in your business, and he was mainly targeting real estate and mortgage professionals. So he said, once somebody comes in, once they walk in, you have to make that experience. In order to get referrals, you really have to build the experience. So the takeaway was, we printed menus, right? And I trained our receptionist, Marcus, to hand, once somebody walked in, to hand a menu, and it had our logo. It's called, the name of my company is called Mortgage Approval Group. So it had our logo at the top. And the first item was cappuccino. The next one was espresso. Next one was coffee. And under it said hot cookie, fresh baked cookie. Underneath that, it said, in other words, they had a menu here. And they walk in, they'd sit down, the menu would get handed to them by a receptionist. We had a whole process of how this happened. And they looked at the receptionist like she had three heads, in a good way. And
Yeah.
they went, what? I'm at a mortgage company, I'm getting financing. And they looked at it and they go, you know what? I'll have a cookie and a cold glass of milk, because it's on the menu. And she would leave, she'd go back in the kitchen, and literally we had a toaster oven there. She'd put the cookies in, bring it out, and then come back out and say, here you go. And what it did is it got to your point earlier about getting buy-in by a team. The salespeople, it helped, you better believe it helped their process, because now from the receptionist, welcoming them, it made that sale a lot easier. So just that one thing was worth every dollar I invested in flying out 14 people, which was a lot of money, but it was a culture. And I have a really good feeling, Marcus, that the digital sales and marketing workshop that you put together, and that's going to be in April, it does that for you. And that's a great way to get that buy-in from a team,
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be the case. That'll be the case.
Great. Well, Marcus, thanks so much for this, man. This has been amazing. And remember what I told you. I don't know if you remember. I know you talked to a lot of people when we were out there, but I gave you an open invite that when you come fishing down in South Florida, we'll go fishing. And not only that, we'll bring you in the studio here. We have an awesome office. I'd love to have you see that. And who knows, maybe you can do a workshop for our team down here, and I'll have you do that. But you can definitely count us in. We will be in April supporting that event and learning from you guys at that. It's going to be great.
Awesome.
So, thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Todd, and good luck with this wonderful podcast. I'm sure you're going to do something great, and everybody needs a mentor. So it's a beautiful thing.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Thanks, Marcus.